We go. Hello, everybody. It's Laura Eisenhower. I have a really special guest today, somebody that I've gotten to know a little bit over the last couple of years, but never enough. So I'm so thrilled to have him here because I will get to learn a lot about his research and what he's doing. His name is Simon Esler. And hello, Simon. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Laura. Thanks for having me.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I'm going to start with his bio, but I've got, a ton of questions. And here it goes. Simon Esler is a full disclosure activist, healer, energy practitioner, researcher, writer, actor, philosopher, father, and adept student of experience. He is ordained by the Government of Ontario as a metaphysical minister of the Bancroft Center for Awakening Spiritual Growth. As a certified life cycle celebrant, he is trained in the art of custom ceremony creation. And through Rainbow Kids Yoga, he is certified in the art of creating children's meditations. He is an alumni of York University with a Bachelor of Arts degree in theater studies. And in November 2017, he launched the QAnon think tank. With an incredible team, he has grown into a 14,000 member community focused on researching, filing, and disseminating the QAnon disclosures. He is a co-host of the Great Awakening .ca and Cosmic Table Talk on the Sphere Being Alliance YouTube channel. He is currently producing a new series on Edge of Wonder TV called Worlds Within, exploring the metaphysical depths of our reality and their connection to our personal power. He has been a speaker at consciousness and ufology events in Toronto, California, and Colorado. Awesome. Oh my gosh. So I don't know where to begin.
Yeah, ask away.
Yeah, I mean, I love the part of it where you say student of experience. I always consider that to be the greatest learning ground that we could possibly, grow from and understand ourselves better from. I mean, what better to learn about ourselves than the things we manifest and the things that show up in our lives. But maybe, before we jump into some of the questions about your current work and the things that you present at events and the upcoming TV show that it has already begun, right? The Edge of Wonder TV.
Yeah, we got 2 episodes up on the platform, and number 3 will be out this Wednesday.
So awesome. Was there like a big moment of awakening? I know we all have different stages and there's different levels of it, but when did this really hit you? Just this greater work that you're here to do?
I would say it was around probably 2009, 2010, when I really, I was hit by a past life memory, like a really intense and kind of devastating past life memory where I was leaving a planet of mine that's life was coming to an end. It wasn't that it had been like destroyed in a war or anything like that. It was really just like the natural ending to this planet's life cycle. But this memory hit me so hard. I was actually online. I was looking at pictures of galaxies and it just triggered something in me. And I sat there and I just wept. And it became very clear to me in that moment that I had past lives outside of, this solar system. And what eventually became clear as I contemplated that experience was that because Earth is struggling with some of that karma, with the planet being in danger and with some of the history of planetary destruction in our solar system, that there was sort of something I had from that experience that I could offer as like a medicine for this planet and for this time on Earth. So it took me some time to sort of transmute it and make it a medicine to offer, but that was really where a lot of this began for me. That was, I'd say the major moment of awakening that sort of created a cascade.
Right. And when did you say that was, or did you say? I
2009, 2010.
2009. Yeah. That was such a significant time. And so just a lot coming up with, this Earth experience. So you study a lot of, galactic history and.
Yeah. I mean, that triggered me into just being curious about that. So I started into that. Yeah.
And so you're also like an energy practitioner, and having this bigger knowledge base must really help, because when you work with clients, you can see more than probably most would, as far as what people are carrying from a history that has been, very cut off. from all of us.
Yeah, that larger perspective is really helpful in guiding people. Even if I don't, necessarily overtly address something on that scale, even
Yeah.
just having a sense of it, it lets you serve people on a much, I guess, more archetypal level.
Right. Right. Yeah, definitely. Um, so, I mean, there's a lot that you've brought to the table here, and I want to go into just your thought about war. You have some very, very interesting perspectives, and also like a summary about, the next show coming up. And,
Yeah.
Obviously people can sign up for the TV show and get the archives of the ones that you've previously done, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
would figure. Yeah.
And
Um,
the first episode, what I start with is sort of trying to create a definition of war that gives us something more to work with, because I think the common definition of war is that it's something that is inherently violent and
right.
aggressive. I think when we start to study the history of war and all the different kinds of war, it's really just a fundamental struggle between two different wills. And that's what it comes down to, I think, is this persistent struggle between two wills that are irreconcilable. And I think that's just a part of the density or the dimension that we're currently occupying. So I find that fundamental definition is a really good place to start, and that's where I start in the series.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. So why don't we'll go to the thought that I had now that we've just kind of like opened this up. I wouldn't want to kind of shift gears at this moment. So would you say that there's two different versions? One might be, for personal sovereignty and for reasons that are very like necessary and important. And then there's the sort of engineered version that we don't fully understand why certain world wars or events, have taken place. Can you help us to kind of differentiate between, war that is necessary for us to move out of the control matrix and wars that have been engineered to keep us kind of stuck in it? Do you go into that kind of stuff?
Yes, absolutely. So I think when we look at war as something that is about will and is about willpower, I mean, that's where our journey begins. Because if we're here on Earth to make a fundamental choice to be of service, well, we're doing that on a planet where that is going to be inherently difficult. I mean, that's the nature of Earth's context right now. It's very difficult to make that choice every day over and over again in a way that is meaningful and authentic. And so that takes the refining of one's will. We really do have to work in this life to strengthen our willpower and the precision of our willpower. So I would say that's the place, that's the version of war where, we're up against other forms of will that would seek to stop our ability to choose service every day. Whereas something like a world war, that's better seen as actually a tactic that is used by, the deep state and these nefarious groups. These engineered wars are just a tactic they use to a different end. So they will engineer a war just to arrive at a larger strategy that they have down the line. So it could be raising funds, it could be social engineering, it's likely both. But I find that helpful in terms of, the breakdown of war as I understand it is that war fighting on Earth, you have the strategic level. So you have your war fighting strategy. Then beneath that, you have operations, right, that come from that strategy. And then operations are made up of tactics. So if we look at it with those sort of tiers, then you can see that, a group like the deep state, they have a strategy to construct a new world order. They have a strategy to, depopulate the earth. And a world war is just an operation for them within that larger strategy. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, very, very well put. So with us on the other side of it, humans that want the basic rights of our needs being met, clean environment, clean food, protection for our children, a better law enforcement, in order to really help us take down criminals that are in powerful positions. Where do you see us as a humanity right now? What can we do in the face of this? I mean, where would the best approach to win this level of war that you see, knowing that there's the option of protests, or I mean, there's a lot of different options, and a lot of people also feel defeated. I mean, we hear the news, coronavirus or something, and that infection of information that, you know, has the truth, but also might have a lot of distortion. What do we do in the face of this? Knowing that sometimes war is necessary, how can we best combat this and not get entangled in it? You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. Well, you know, the reason I wanted to study this was because, as far as I could tell, throughout history, it seems like war has actually been the best example of collective will being organized and applied. And that has been historically through violence, unfortunately. But when we look at the way war organizes large groups of human beings, and then it applies the will of those human beings to a task, it's actually very effective. And that's one of the fundamental things that I seek to learn from war, and that I hope to teach people about war, is that if we can reach that level of effectiveness in organizing as a collective, and we can apply our collective will with that level of effectiveness, then we can achieve things like, cleaning up the environment, and, you know, regaining our sovereignty. And we can even look at it from those levels that I talked about a moment ago, from the idea of having overall strategies, and then letting those strategies, you know, that we develop as a community, give birth to clear operations, which are made up of tactics. You know, that way of organizing our will is very, very effective. So community is a big aspect of this. And I think to organize ourselves in that way and to learn from war, we do have to drop these notions of being sort of anti-war, in that sense of sort of being triggered by the word, and learning to organize ourselves effectively in that way. So, you know, I for this series, I've been studying The Art of War, Sun Tzu's book, and that's a really interesting way into this, right? Because when you look at the sort of wisdom that was gathered about warfighting in this book, you start to understand that it doesn't need to be applied to violence. It's more about learning to understand your enemy. You know, you're learning to understand that other will that we're up against, and to understand it like very, very deeply, and in a way where you're not triggered by their presence. And that takes some time, right? Because there's a lot of abuse, there's a lot of pain from the presence of you know, those who have chosen the negative path on earth. But we have the blessing of being here. We have the blessing of being the ones who are here to serve this planet. And when we can sort of land in like, okay, like I made a fundamental choice to be here. Now I have to study what happened to this planet, and then get together with my community, and we need to become organized and apply ourselves in that way. You know, I think there's a lot there that we could be doing more effectively.
Oh, that's so brilliant, you know, because the conquer and divide tactics are what make it so hard, you know, and it is a bit of a chess game.
Yeah.
And yeah, and there doesn't have to be, you know, loss or the fear of defeat when we come together and we have that will, because the mind control keeps us from being able to do that, and the social engineering, like you mentioned,
Yeah,
and the war on
absolutely.
consciousness. Yeah, so you know, it's really, really important to because there's a lot about the new age, what I consider to be sometimes deception, about all love and light, and that
Yeah.
doesn't fully resonate with me. And some people are like surprised when they see another side of me that stands my ground, that says, excuse me, I'm not going to let you walk all over me, and
Yeah.
throws stones at me. I just feel it's a protection thing, but somebody might think I'm actually going to war with that person, but it's just, I don't want that energy in my space. So what are your thoughts about some of that kind of propaganda of that love and light? Do you kind of challenge that in some of your talks?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that's like one of the most successful psyops that has been launched on this planet, has been to basically build the new age movement from scratch. I believe that the majority of it was engineered. And my understanding is that came from these occult groups understanding karma and cycles better than us. And they understood that there was going to be a wave of potential that would arrive, and they needed to redefine the application of that energy in a way that would cause us to feel like we were, you know, moving into this new consciousness, and to really create that sensation while actually making us quite ineffective in applying our collective will. So when we learn to understand the way that was manipulated, I think there's a lot to be gathered there. And that's, some of that just comes from personal research, looking into that deception, but a lot of it just comes from proper introspection and learning to understand that we are deeply sort of contradictory beings. We have this wealth of passion within us that can hold the light and the dark in a way that is peaceful. And I think that's something that humanity is starting to step into. We often hear these stories about how we're perceived in the galaxy, that humanity is this sort of unique entity that has this emotional depth and sort of breadth that is kind of rare and hard to understand for a lot of races. But I think within that, there is a power to apply ourselves and to apply our free will with something very rich, I think, in this galaxy's history.
Yeah, totally. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, it's these movements just definitely seem to hijack what they are predicting or can, tell we're naturally going to step into, because it's no secret, and with the occult knowledge that they hold, what these cycles, like you said, are about, and this window period of ascension and these timeline wars connected to this particular period. So these kind of topics are so incredibly important. Not a whole lot of people talk about it. So I'm so glad to get to know you and your work more. You just don't hear people talking about this stuff. And to be able to redefine the way we relate to certain things, to bring that, spirit, that willpower, that fighting spirit, where ego, and our self willpower is not in the wrong kind of expression. It's connected to our higher self. It's connected to our divine nature. So,
Yes.
I mean, when you hear people kind of bashing the ego and that whole, it just seems like that's a target to keep us, like almost afraid
Absolutely.
of stepping in our power for the right reasons.
I totally agree, because I was actually looking at this today. I was going over some of Michael Newton's work again, because I've really been, that's been a big resource for this series. And I was looking into one of the hypnosis sessions he did with a client that brought them into the space where souls are being sort of birthed and created. And there's this one specific section, the client in the session describes it as the world without ego. And it's this space in which souls are endowed with ego, because that's their like unique signature. And so it's really beautiful the way it's described. It's this like wonderful gift that's imparted upon the soul so that it becomes unique and becomes self-aware and begins its journey. So when you understand that this was a gift given to us so that we could, move into the karma of, experiencing separation towards unity and that whole epic journey, then that starts to, I think, it starts to subdue all these weird ideas that ego is bad, because we were gifted this as an important tool, like at the sort of beginning of our whole experience. And I find going over that passage really helpful in sort of healing those notions.
Yeah, gosh. So what do you notice? I mean, you started this group, you said 14,000 and growing.
Yeah.
What do you do with the opposition? Because I mean, when I even mention anything on social media connected to Q or anything about this administration, it's very, very hard, some of the negative energy that gets directed. And it's very frustrating, because I think this is something that's worthy of our, greater understanding. So I guess there's a double question here. How has that navigation process been, and what revelations are recent when it comes to, Q drops or anything in relation to Q? And also, what do you do in the face of a lot of opposition or criticism about, oh, it's a psyops, or, you must be giving your power away, which I don't, agree with. I kind of sit on the fence often. And in this interview, I'm not going to share my full on opinion, and I don't want to put you in a position of, wanting to talk about or talking about anything you wouldn't want to, but would you be able to answer any of those questions?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, look, the way that QAnon is impacting the world is it's large in scale. Okay. It's very noticeable. It doesn't matter whether you stand with that operation or not. It's a huge, it's a huge thing that's going on in the world right now. So it does need to be discussed. It does need to be debated. But the only way to do that properly is to study the actual Q drops and be referring to the Q drops. There's no other way to talk about it. So when people want to go off of like media sources or like philosophical, like very sort of loose, generic philosophical ideas, to me, that's not a real discussion because you're not actually holding the same source material. And I speak about this often on Facebook and social media in general, and not just about Q, but that if we want to be having meaningful discussions about these controversial issues, we need to first agree upon a source and be discussing the same source. So the two people, they go and they read that source and then they come together and they discuss that source.
Well, it's like a book club, you know, you discuss
Yes.
the book. It doesn't mean that it's like following everything, you know, and that's exactly,
Yes.
yeah. So keep going.
Exactly. So with Q, that's really important because if you haven't actually looked at the Q drops, if you haven't studied the Q proofs, for example, and you can easily go to the website that has the Q proofs and look over them. There's hundreds now. If you're going to debunk Q, then you have the work ahead of you of going through the Q proofs and debunking them one by one. That's the body of work. If you want, like go ahead, you know, I challenge people to do that. It would be a great project. I would be fascinated by that. You know, that's what needs to be done. So I agree there are meaningful debates. I'm not surprised that people are triggered by Q or that they're upset by it. That makes perfect sense to me. But in terms of people publicly challenging Q, I rarely see anyone do any of those things and create proper dialogue around it. So that's what I invite people who are in opposition to Q to do, you know, to actually study it yourself, then to bring forward the Q proofs that you feel you can debunk, you know, actually address it directly. And then, you know, something meaningful will follow from that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think a lot of people get triggered because it represents to them, you know, Trump, or you must be a Trump supporter. And it becomes that
Yeah.
battle of right and left, and people lose the bigger picture of we're dealing with deep state and the quest for truth and human sovereignty. Like to pull it down into the lower levels of political power struggle is very frustrating.
It
Do you
is.
agree?
Totally. And I think, you know, Trump, it's funny. We're just talking about the ego and the use and the application of the ego. And to me, Trump is like this collective sort of archetype of ego. Like he is very egoic, and you know, a lot of people are really triggered by that, but in the same way that they're against ego as a fundamental sort of thing within themselves. So that's very interesting to notice. But I also recognize, and I have a great deal of compassion for this community and for, you know, truther communities, in that, you know, we're some of the most targeted communities on the planet. We have been hit with wave after wave of psyops, of false predictions, of false prophets. And so I get that people, they go there with Q. You know, they're triggered by it. They're like, this is just another psyop, because they have been psyoped over and over again.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
painful. It's so
Yeah.
painful.
Yep. There are so many psyops introduced, and to the point where it burns people out.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, you know, there's just a lot of them. I won't even name them because some people would challenge it, and we don't need to go there. But yeah, and also just feeling, you know, something is a fraud, so everybody must be a fraud. And then almost like, I don't like how the UFO community is becoming like a joke to some people because of all this. And people have
Yeah.
to understand, like, we're dealing with human trafficking, we're dealing with SRA, satanic ritual abuse, MK Ultra.
Yeah.
And these are the heaviest things to wrap our heads around. And this is not just talking about aliens and UFOs. I mean, there's layer upon layer upon layer. And some of us are really getting our hands in some of the hardest of areas. And I just wish, you know, people would give that a little bit more respect. And I know, you know, you are very expanded into so many areas. Just for example, with the Q drop, I investigated Rachel Chandler. I found all those websites. Some were very, very hard to find because they weren't for the public. And they started to get posted a lot. You know, I wasn't the only one that obviously that found them, of the faces of these supposed models that absolutely looked tortured and in a lot of pain. So that was an example of investigating a Q drop.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the biggest red pills, because you can look back at how many media sources were rolling their eyes and ridiculing the idea of elite pedophilia, right? Like that, they specifically said how ridiculous it was that all these communities are saying there's a huge elite pedophilia problem. And now it's out there. There's a massive problem with elite pedophilia. You know, it's so obvious at this point. So if you're someone who has participated in shaming people for trying to say there's elite pedophilia, then, you know, be humble, research it yourself. You know, this is a very important topic. And, you know, in Canada, this is a huge problem in Canada, and it's so much less out there than it is in America. You know, there's a serious problem with Satanism and you know, satanic ritual abuse and child trafficking here in Canada that's not being addressed properly. And you know, it's really, really painful to reconcile. Like, it's hard, especially having children, right? Like, that sort of deepens a lot of this work in a very challenging way. And you know, some of that is, I think, it's one of the deepest parts of our collective shadow, right? Is the abuse of innocence on this planet. And it's also one of the most effective tactics that, you know, that the deep state has applied, is this massive war on innocence has been very, very effective.
Oh, and treatment of animals and zoos.
Huge. And you know, this gets into galactic karma, right? Like, in my research, what I've found is that we were treated as beasts of burden. You know, we were treated as animals, as these sort of animalistic slaves. That was something that seems to have gone on Earth in our deep past many times, by sort of extraterrestrial races and other groups. And so, you know, now you have this this industry on Earth that tortures animals in massive numbers and tears animal families apart. And you know, there's this